how do you, as a leader, communicate your core values and the core values of the organization to your team?
I spend a lot of time with my team, and I think if for all of you that do lead teams, you know the real value you have as a leader is spending time actually understanding the different cultures. You can imagine looking after the Middle East, Africa and Russia. I have Ukrainian leaders, I've got Arabic leaders, I've got African leaders, and probably the one thing that unites us as a team, and we all have our differences, is that there's probably about 70 or 80% of the core values that we have that we all share. So no matter whether you're Russian or Ukrainian, or an African, there are certain things that we agree as a leadership team are dear to us, and that we agree that we're going to stick to those principles, whether it's integrity, whether it's governance, whether it's honesty, trust, and you have to then create that environment for your team to be able to feel that there is that openness there. I don't agree with all my leaders. Often some of them I do actually disagree with, but one thing we do have, which is one of our core values, is respect for the individual. Right. So I respect that, and you know, I allow them to have the environment to be able to disagree with me and challenge me, and I encourage that. And I think if you do that,
so you have teams from different countries, so therefore there are different cultures that you have to manage. How do you navigate that entire process?
You become a bit of a chameleon, to be honest, and I think it's one of the skills you have to have as a leader. Not everybody can do it. If I look at the role I've been in it for about 3 years. One of the reasons I was given the role was because all my predecessors had failed to be able to unite that team because of the different cultures. I believe that if you have a genuine interest in people and you take away everything else and you want to really develop them, then that's something that most people are able to relate to. And you have to adjust your leadership style to the culture. So I spent a lot of time understanding Middle Eastern culture, so that I realized that when the perception of maybe some of my peers and colleagues was that they seemed a little bit too relaxed, or often, you know, even probably not that caring about the business, actually, you know, when you find out about Middle Eastern culture, family comes first. And when you spend your time then, even if it's a conversation to say, first of all, how's the family? I know all of my leaders' children's names. If there's anything wrong with them, this is the first question I ask. Good example was on Saturday morning. I woke up and I woke up to the explosions in Istanbul. I have 20 staff in Istanbul. The first thing I did was to ring my manager in Istanbul and make sure we checked that every one of our employees there was safe. Irrespective of the numbers or whatever needs to be done, that's where you have that cultural adjustment depending on the market that you're working in.
So in an organization, do you think that it's the responsibility of the leader to understand the cultures of the team, or do you think that the team members also need to understand the culture of the leader and the culture of the organization as well that they're working in?
I think it's reciprocal. Okay. I think that the leader of that business does need to take the initiative.
Right.
If I go to Riyadh, I certainly don't dress like this, and I do wear a throbe. I do have an Arabic headdress. My headdress sits in the Riyadh office, but I have my own throbes and I take them, so I don't travel with this. But that cultural adjustment is something I've learned very quickly, that it actually helps with business there, but actually it's a respect thing for the culture that you're visiting. It's nothing to do with religion or anything else. It's just about understanding and observing the local customs and things that are going to make people feel comfortable. So you do need to take the time to do that. But on the other hand, when I go to any of the countries I've visited, the first thing I say to my staff, please do not take me to a posh hotel to eat because I'm the boss. Please take me to where you eat and where you socialise. So again, if I'm in Riyadh, I go to where my manager normally eats. We sit on the floor, we eat with our hands. I'm not going to go to the fancy Brazilian restaurant which is serving antelope and everything else.
And how do you find...
Which is what I did actually have one day. Very gamey me.
Well, how do you find operating like that works? Do you find that you are able to pull more from your team? Do you find that they deliver more value for you as their leader because you're pretty much kind of grounded where that is concerned?
I think it does. I mean, we talk about diversity a lot, and I think, you know, there's lots of reports out now about having diversity in teams, whether it's gender, ethnicity, disability, and what that brings. And I think now we're starting to see results out there that shows that companies that do have diverse boards or diverse teams, you know, do perform better. And there's bottom line results in certain industries that can show that. Probably by default, my teams are diverse. So the trick really then is to make sure that those core values you have are things that we all unite with. So I'd say 60-70% of what we all believe, but there's probably that 35-40% of cultural variation which I allow them to do business and do the things they do because it's not something that I can really add value to. So I empower them to be able to say, well, these things we need to stick together with, but these things you have the ability and the empowerment to go out and work your business the way you need to make it happen within the confines of those things we're called to.
How did you learn these skills, Tunji? Because I mean, these aren't skills that are readily available to everyone. So talk me through any kind of process that you've been through in order to develop into the leader that you've developed in Cisco.
I think it's probably similar to your book in terms of having a methodology and a plan to do things, and I think that I have a very deep curiosity about people first and foremost. So wherever I go, I will take the time to understand the dynamics of that particular country or that culture. I do my work. Your pyramid that you had about history and culture doesn't just apply to black people. It applies to whether it's the Persian Empire, whether it's what's going on in the Middle East. So I take my time to understand what the differences or the challenges in those regions, whether it's a Sunni and what that means to someone, whether it's a Kurd. I have guys that are working in Iraq for me. So you have to understand the different dynamics. And I think when you can show empathy with people in terms of their culture or having an understanding, I don't need to know all the detail, but it's actually having a good understanding and that you've taken the initiative to do that. There are many books out there, and I'm not a big reader. People often say to me that you must read tons of books. I read 3 books a year, probably maximum, and you're lucky you're going to get your book ready. And the reason for that is that I think that you can read as many business books or leadership books as you want, but for me, experience and exposure are probably 2 things that are important, and I think that you learn that. I've been working for nearly 30 years, so I've probably got a few books in my head just by the fact that I've been out there. And if you have had a career that you have traveled a lot, you do pick things up. And if you're curious about people, cultures, and different ways that people work, then you start to build up a good Rolodex of how people work, what they do, what drives them, what motivates them, and then you bring that together when you inherit a new team. Yeah, absolutely. So the burning question though is that you're in Cisco. You have a team above you. Have bosses, right? So as a person of color, how do you find? And I'm putting you on the spot. How do you find the relationship from those above you working with you, and how do you work with them to maintain that equilibrium within the organization where that respect is reciprocal? It's a lot of work. I mean, I think that with any relationship, the number one reason why people leave organizations is not the company, it's their direct line manager. So the relationship that you have with your management team and your peers is important. And it's worth investing in the team at the time really to see the dynamics. I often talk about the fact that people have both IQ and EQ. And the IQ bit we all get, everyone in this room is pretty intelligent, but that's only just a table stakes type of thing to get you, at the table. The EQ is the bit, the emotional intelligence is the part that often people fall down on in terms of being able to work those dynamics. And whether you're managing up, sideways or down, you have different skills that you need to be able to use, and you need to spend the time, understand what the motivations of your boss. Every leader I've worked for is different, and it takes you a while to be able to calibrate what their care-abouts are, what their motivations are. I've had leaders who have felt threatened by I guess my capability. I've had those that have kind of been very distant, who have just said, you're totally empowered, to the point that you forget that they actually are there. So you have to be able to adjust your style based on what that leader's kind of style is, and then be able to adjust it. Similarly with your peers, you have to be very aware of the impact that you can have to help them and support them, but also to ensure that you maintain your level of credibility within the group, and that you don't bend them out of shape or yourself out of shape when you do that. So it does require work. It's not something that you can learn from a book.
Yeah.
And some of it's down to intuition and inclination.
Yes.
But also I think it's taking the time to study people. And I think if you do that, then you've got a good opportunity to lay that platform.
Do you think your and we had a brief conversation before this, and you were telling me about your backstory, which I'm going to ask you to share a bit of. But do you think your backstory helped to lay the groundwork for the kind of leader that you are now? I know you're Nigerian. Were you born in Nigeria, or were you?
No, I was born in St Mary's Hospital, Paddington. Okay. Where all the royal babies are born, I'm told.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it does. I think that, you know, before I give a bit of background to that, I think that you are a product of your environment. So if you're self-aware of how you're wired as an individual, we're all wired differently and motivated by different things, then it does take a journey of self-belief to be able to go back. And I think once you understand that, then you'll know what your motivations are and what your drivers are. And for me, you know, mine is, and I often tell this story to young people because I mentor a lot of young people and I go to a lot of schools. And I give them the great story and I kind of tell them how I went through school and I kind of went to university. And then, you know, I went on and, you know, worked for some really cool companies. I've worked for Steve Jobs before, when he left Apple the first time, and stuff like that. And it looks great, and they look at your job today and think, fantastic. And, you know, they're all inspired. And then I kind of say, oh, by the way, the flip side to that was that I lost my father at 2, I was orphaned by 11, and I was on the street by 12. So I chose not to go into care, and I went to live in a hostel at 12. But I stayed in school for the remaining 4 years until I got to 16. I did my O-levels. I cleared those. I went on and did my A-levels. But if you go back, for me, I knew from when I was 12 at school, because I had one intervention from a small company called IBM that came to my school, and they bought what was, and I'm going to predate myself in terms of age, they showed me what was going to be the IBM PC. And they hadn't
was going to be.
Was going to be, so that predates me. And they bought this computer and they were telling me how this thing that they put on the desk was going to was reduced from the side of a computer, which was probably the size of this room. And they'd reduced it down into that, and I was captivated. And I made my decision there and then that I want to do that. And I asked the engineer that came in, what do I need to do? And he said, well, you need to choose these science subjects, you need to go here, you're going to have to go to university, and you know, that's how you kind of get into it. And I followed the plan. So even on the backdrop of, you know, from probably 12 to 13 to 16 when I left school, I was in a hostel in Forest Gate. The great thing about hostels, and they're fantastic, is that apart from the good work they do, is that you arrive at 7 o'clock at night, you get fed and you get a bed, and you've got to get the heck out of there at 7 o'clock in the morning. And for school life, that's perfect, because, you know, where am I going to go? So I did my sport, did my library, did my books. And
for work life as well, maybe that's how you did it.
It probably is. But I think that's the backdrop, is to be able to say that no matter what you see on the outside, and I'm sure if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, it was pretty impressive, but what you don't see is the backdrop of how you've had to do that with a lot of the other challenges. And I'm not resentful of it, it's just how it was in life, and you have a choice to make. Absolutely. You know, you can either decide to, I always call it with the children, you can either find yourself in the pit of despair and sorrow and think, oh, you know, the system's failed me, or you do something about it. And I chose to do something about it, and got to university. Funny enough, I turned this one down. So, not because of that.
Really? What's that for?
But actually, it was a good reason. There were only three universities that did. Everyone I knew that was doing computers was doing computer science. I actually wanted to do hardware engineering. Okay. City University, Essex, where I went, and Queen Mary, the only 3 that did engineering, and I chose Essex because it was nearer to where I lived, and it was the only university actually, and it's quite interesting. They were the only university that would allow me to stay on campus for the 4 years, because typically you get your first year at uni and then you find your own digs. I couldn't afford to live anywhere, so I stayed on campus for the 4 years and had a job as a lab rat during the breaks.
So when did you start visualizing what that career goal would be for you? I mean,
it was It was pretty much from 11. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be a computer engineer.
Yeah, but in terms of, so did you just want to become an electrical engineer? How did you decide, or did you decide that you wanted to progress to a senior level within the organization?
No, I started life working as an engineer, as a microelectronics engineer. I did that for about 11 or 12 years. And actually my role into leadership was an interesting one. It was probably more driven by money. I think as any of you in the room who are engineers, I became a frustrated one because I noticed all the sales guys drove all the flash cars, had all the money and all the women. And I was thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I'm doing all the work. And I was told one day by a sales manager, he kind of said to me, put up or shut up. And I said, I can do your job. And he says, well, try it. And I did, and I never forget, I got a job as an account manager. I absolutely watched my salary drop by about 50% because I'd had this comfort blanket of an engineer's job and I had to now earn commission. But 3 or 4 months later, I began to start earning money. And what I found out though was that I was what you would call a compassionate salesperson. Because I was an engineer, I wouldn't sell stuff that I didn't believe in or believed that worked. So my customers loved me because if it was too early, I'd say, don't buy it yet because the technology is bleeding edge. Wait, and the sales guys would be going, no, sell it, sell it. And what I found is that I cared about my customers, but I also cared about the people I worked with. I supported them. I had no problem helping my peers to help them close business. And I think it became apparent quite quickly that I probably had leadership potential. And I then found that I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed helping people, coaching people, and that started to lead to me becoming more recognized as being more of a team leader, and then I kind of naturally started to fall into more leadership positions. Right. But I didn't stop there because I didn't think that I had all the skills to be a leader, so I'm a life learner. I'll always go back to school. I went back to school in 2013, I went back to business school. I went to Stanford and Wharton that year to go and learn some new skills, and I'll continue to always do that. So I went away, did some study, tried to learn a bit more about leadership, and then started to apply that. So it's about the doing again, as you said in the book. It's about actually action. So I've gone and learned something, seen what it can do, applied it, and then started to build my capability.
It's so important. People tend to see the whole term personal development is a kind of bad word, but personal development is so very, very key. I ensure that every year I learn something new. So I've studied gardening and I've studied pottery. And it teaches you different skills of how you can apply those skills to life and also to business, or to so many other areas. But as organizations tend to get big, Tunji, and as you moved into much larger organizations, the institutions tend to dampen the drive and the inspiration of individuals. How did you manage that as you came into Cisco as a large organization and as you moved up? How did you manage to keep your drive and to keep coaching and mentoring and leaving the door open and pulling people up the ladder? How did you manage to keep doing that?
I guess it's a labour of love to some extent. I mean, I joined Cisco in 1999, so I've been there for 17 years. I'm probably about to embark on my maybe 8th job that I've had since I've been there. And I think it's about how you continuously look at yourself in where you are with your career, but also then balancing that with what you care about and are passionate about. We talked about passion earlier enough. Yeah. For me, my job and what I do is a means to be able to serve my passions. And I used that very effectively. And when we started Your Future Ambition, it was because I worked in an organization that actually had that as part of their alignment. The idea was sold to them, but actually it served 2 purposes. It allowed me to do my job, differentiate myself as a leader, but also to serve my passion, but also to share that with what organizations wanted, the organization that Cisco wants to do around our corporate social responsibility. So I think that if you're able to keep that balance, and it's not easy because you have the pressures of numbers or whatever it is that you have in the business, I think your passion, and you have your passion, and we've talked about this, Romeo, about the fact that you had 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yes.
I'm very clear. You know, I'm 50 years old now. I've got 5 years left and I'm done in corporate life. I'll be out, you know, and the reason I will be is because I've set the stones in terms of the non-exec work and the corporate social responsibility work and the social enterprise work that we do. That will be the things I will do probably in the next 5 or so years.
So you've set that
so
vision.
you set that vision out.
And start
but that's
planning
always
towards
been
it.
a long-term thing to do. I had no intention of working in corporate life for the rest of my days. And if you talk to my children, I've got a daughter that's 10 and a son that's 8. I've told both my kids very clearly, you will work for a corporate for 5 years only. And then when you've done it and learnt what you need to do, then you get the heck out and you go and work for yourself and apply what you've learnt there. Yeah. But you will not work in a corporate organisation for your life. And my hope is that I've put enough away to allow them to set themselves up.
Yes.
And I won't say I've made any mistakes at all. You always make some. But I think if I look back at my own life, probably because of the way I'm wired as a person and because of what I've been through, I'm probably not. I haven't taken as many chances as I probably could have. I'm very entrepreneurial. Yeah. I've run record companies, I've run modelling agencies, I've done all sorts of stuff, but I love doing it. But the problem is I never took that leap like you've done, and I salute you for it, because I know I'd always want the safety blanket, because I know I'm wired to think that once you're homeless, you're going to have to think that, well, I need that security blanket. So for me, I know I'm wired differently. The good thing is I know that. So I'm comfortable with my own skin with that. Yeah. But I know that the next generation coming through, there are so many opportunities for them that I want to make sure that they are able to really capture that.
So in terms of challenges, what would you say was one of the biggest challenges you faced I know what's going to be in your personal life. I think I know what it's going to be, but also in work.
I think the biggest challenge I've faced and it's probably more recently, probably in the last 2 years, is that you have to be able to take feedback in every form that it comes, good or bad, whether you like it or not. And probably about 2 years ago, I was given some feedback. I went for a role at work and I didn't get the job. And the reason I didn't get the job was I was told, ironically with the diamonds, I was told I was too perfect and too polished. And I reacted, I won't say very well to that. I didn't see it, I just didn't understand it. I thought, well, that's just absolute rubbish. I remember telling my boss at the time, probably sarcastically, could you recommend some unpolishing courses? Which didn't go down very well. But what I did do, and I think one of the things I was given, is that one of my peers actually in the US, who was on the interview panel, said, I think you probably need to go away and probably have some self-reflection time, but also get some feedback of how you're showing up. And that was probably one of the toughest times, because I went to this place, it was 4 days, I got there the first day, you're there with 7 other strangers, quite very senior, and it felt like therapy for the first day or two, and it was like, my name's so-and-so, I'm recovering, whatever. And, but actually...
Like AA for leaders.
And it was almost like AA for leaders, but after about 2 or 3 days, people were breaking down, they were crying, and I'm like, what's going on here? And I started to just think, well, it's Wrightsville Beach, it's North Carolina, it's quite nice, I'll enjoy it. But by the 4th day, I was broken, I was in tears. I'd got feedback, I had to look at it, and I had to really take that on board. Yeah. And what I did do, which was really hard, and this is what it is about when you have trust in your team, I came back and opened that up to my team to say, these are the things that I need to improve on, and I need your help to do that. And that was probably one of the hardest things I did. We as a team cried, which was kind of really weird, but we did. But for me, that was probably one of the toughest things I've had.
So what would you think are some of the traits, or I don't want to say mistakes, let me say traits or behaviors that derail leaders in their careers?
Well, they're probably cliched and quite easy. I think the biggest one is around the lack of emotional intelligence. Right. I think leaders have egos. We all have egos, but it's how you tune that ego. I think having an ego is healthy to an extent, but if you're tuned out of your teams and your people, that's probably the biggest mistake I see many leaders make. And that doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur who needs to be self-confident about their business. Yeah. It's a people business. People buy from people. Mm-hmm. And if you don't buy into people, and I'm going to use a quote, I don't use many, But I listened to a lady called Carla Harris recently, who you may know, she was the leader of wealth management at Morgan Stanley.
Yeah.
And her great saying in her book, and I'm not plugging it here, but her great saying actually is, perception is the co-pilot of reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you take that thing, when you show up, no matter how you think you are, if you don't show up right and you don't understand how you're showing up, people will believe, that that's who you are as a person, even if you don't think you are. So
Yes.
self-learning about yourself, looking at who you are as a person, maybe, looking at that as a leader is probably one of the most important, things that a lot of leaders don't do. They don't look at themselves often enough.
Absolutely. And that even goes for people who are aspiring for that leadership role as well. It's a matter of just taking that look at who you are.
Indeed.
and the perception around it. So what advice would you give someone who is one aspiring to become a leader or who has been given a leadership role for the first time?
I think that if you're a leader for the first time, I always say, and there's a couple of things I always say to people. One of them is about patience and tolerance. My leadership style is very, very simple. I give people a very long rope by which to hang themselves by. And that's not a bad thing. It's about the fact that you need to be tolerant with people and you need to give people time to be able to do it. But ultimately, if somebody fails as a leader in my business with me, ultimately they will probably need to look at themselves, because they would have had a lot of coaching and help along the way. So I always say to young leaders coming in, don't try and do things too quickly. Learn your art and your craft well. You have the science, you've done the education bit, but learn the art and craft of people, how they work, the dynamics. Take the time. The fact that you've got the education piece is fantastic. We talk about in our company at Cisco the 3 E's: education, experience, and exposure. The education you've got, the exposure and the experience comes with time. And when you have that time and you take the time to do it, then you become an effective leader. So I'd always say to an aspiring leader, learn the experience and the exposure part over time, and you'll be fine.
What are some of the things you like to ask other leaders when you get a chance?
I'm actually quite funny when I interview people, because I had a really good technique given to me by one of our presidents years ago, and I use it all the time. And when he interviews people, he gets the sheet of paper, and we all get given one. Ask them about this one. They don't look like a serial killer. They don't look like that. They go through the list. But actually, what he does is he says, forget about the paper. He literally sometimes screws it up in front of you and throws it on the floor. And he goes, right, you're a chest of drawers. And there are 7 drawers. And each of them represents a part of your life. And I'm going to pull open a drawer randomly, and there's going to be something about you that I want to ask you. And he'll pull out the drawer, and he'll ask something like you've asked today about what have you found challenging. But he asks some very good questions. One of the questions I ask is that, tell me about a bad leader that you've worked for, and what were the attributes that leader had that were which you didn't like or you felt were poor, and explain to me about what you see in leadership and what those things are. What are those traits that you saw? And then you'll ask the same question on the opposite side. Who's a good leader you've worked for? I don't do what my president does. He'll ask you the name of the person and he writes it down. I don't do that, which is quite intimidating, but especially if it's someone that you work in a company with. But that's the kind of way that I kind of look at things and approach it when I'm interviewing people. And there's different aspects. You learn a lot more about people, and again, by asking them different questions about everyday life, what they're passionate about, what really gets them motivated.
Yep.
About their family life, things that they feel more comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, whatever degree they've got, whatever jobs, whatever on the CV, that's kind of like the IQ bit that's got them there. You wouldn't be at the table talking to me if that wasn't the case. I'm more interested in you as a person. What do you bring to the table? We talk about diversity, and it's quite interesting.
I was just coming to that point, but yeah.
I will, and I know a lot of books and a lot of people talk about culture. I would challenge that the other way. I don't look for people to be culturally aligned within companies. I look for different culture that people can bring in to add. Because if you end up getting people because you're ticking, do they fit into the culture of the company?
Yeah.
Guess what? You're going to have the same people,
yeah,
the same thoughts and the same types of things. So I don't look for people that kind of fit the culture of what the company is. I look for people that are going to add to what we have.
Yeah.
And that may mean you
that's
bring
what,
different people in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what diversity is all about. We tend to think of diversity in this country as, whether you are black, LBGT, all that kind of stuff. But it's a diversity of thought that you bring to the table. So, so I agree with you completely.